February 7th, 1981, Washington County, Ohio. Sheriff Joe Clark spent the evening like any other, unwinding at home, safe within the four walls of his own house. But safety was an illusion when a threat was watching from outside. Without warning, a bullet ripped through the window in the kitchen, striking Sheriff Clark down in cold blood. And in a flash, a respected lawman became a murder victim, and a small Ohio community was left reeling. But when the sirens faded and the investigation stalled, justice slipped through the cracks. For over 3 decades, the case sat frozen in time. Rumors swirled, leads dried up, and a killer walked free, hiding in plain sight. This is a story of betrayal, murder, and a justice delayed, but not denied. This is the story of Sheriff Joe Clark. Cold blood, cold case. Hey, y'all, I'm Kris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Nepal.
Viva Nepal!
Eddie Murphy, Golden Child. Love that movie.
Rob loves that movie.
Tashe Delek.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Viva Nepal! I had to do it twice. Wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitch to Homicide, then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who are just like you and love true crime can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below.
Yep.
And if you want true crime with us all the time, please join our closed Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. Just go to Facebook, type in H2H. In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions, you're in. I've got a backlog of people who have asked to join the group but have not answered the questions.
Just 2 questions.
I give you about 2 weeks, and then I'm like, okay. Go join.
Yeah.
I post photos and other information in there as well. You can find us on Instagram at Hitch to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send the Robster some coffee.
There you go.
Or me 1 Diet Mountain Dew, which I'm drinking maybe half of one now. Telling you, getting off the sauce.
Yep.
You can find that link in our show notes. You can also send us a text. The link to that is at the top of the show notes where it says, send Kris and Rob a text.
Yep. I'm also planning on doing a little behind the scenes here. We've had a few people say, why aren't you in the same room with Kris? Well, there's a reason behind that, and I'm going to show you the behind the scenes why. So here it comes.
Well, I also get the email that says, stop all the crap in the beginning. Too much chit chat. I'm like, I am going through it as fast as I can.
Well, and the other thing is, it's 2025. There's a thing where you can just fast forward
30 seconds. I know. We give you a big dong so you know when, maybe I shouldn't have used that word, a big ding when you know that the podcast is actually starting. So whatever.
Okay.
I digress.
Yeah, well.
This is a crazy story that spans over 30 years, and it proves a couple things. You never know who your enemies are and what they're capable of.
Yep.
And sometimes cold case files are actually solved.
Cold case file.
Yes. Before we get started, let me thank some sources. True Crime Mysteries, Medium.com, Officer Down Memorial Page, WTAP in Parkersburg, West Virginia, the Marietta Times, Vocal Media Criminal, Medium.com, Office of the Ohio Attorney General, the Parkersburg News and Sentinel, Find a Grave, WDTN, the Chico Enterprise Record, the Cinemaholic, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and A&E's Cold Case Files.
Man, that's a lot.
It's just like Cold Case Files.
It's just like Cold Case Files. All right, well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Richard Ray Clark, he goes by Joe, don't know how, Richard Ray Clark, and you get Joe out of that. But that's what he goes by, Joe.
Well, I actually had an Uncle Joe, and his name was Howard.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I have no
Who
idea.
could say?
Yeah.
He was born on February 5th, 1932 in Marietta, Washington County, Ohio, to parents Richard Thomas and Marie Louise Davis Clark. He's a homegrown Washington County, Ohio boy. He's a homegrown Ohio boy,
There
Rob.
you go. Go OU.
Oh, you're really going to love this.
Yeah.
He had a sister and a brother. He went to Ohio State, where he studied psychology, and he was a huge Ohio State fan, big Buckeye fan.
Yes, and if you're from Ohio, you're an OSU fan, no matter what. I went to Ohio University, OU. It's the Ohio State University and Ohio University. So just to make that distinction.
Okay.
I have no idea why I brought that up.
Okay.
There you go. There's your Ohio history for the day.
In 1961, he married Patricia Ann Poole. She had a daughter from a previous marriage to a man named Frederick Ray Blake in 1952. When these two get married, she's 30 and he's 29, and together they have one son named Tim. Now, in 1967, Joe takes a job with the Washington County Sheriff's Department, working his way up to the number 2 guy. And Lieutenant Joe Clark worked right underneath the sheriff, Richard Ellis.
Okay.
Joining the county's police department was a lifelong dream for Joe. He worked as the drug awareness officer for the sheriff's department. He was known as one of the guys who, quote, didn't step on people's toes. He didn't come on too strong. That just wasn't his style, end quote. He was the kind of law enforcement officer who drove his cruiser with the window down because he wanted to be able to hear in case somebody was calling for help. And that just warmed my heart. Somebody did a ride along with him way back when, and they were like, hey, Joe, why don't you turn on the air conditioner?
Yeah.
And he was like, I leave the windows down. I need to be able to hear if somebody needs me.
That's nice.
Joe went into schools to talk about drug abuse, and he took special courses in law enforcement at Hocking Technical College. He and Pat together organized Explorer Post number 34. And in case you don't know what that is, an Explorer Post is a volunteer organization often sponsored by law enforcement agencies or other organizations that provides young adults with hands-on experience in a specific field such as law enforcement or aviation. And these posts offer a variety of activities and training aiming to educate and engage youth in their chosen career path. And they target young adults who are like between the ages of 14 and 18. And he and his wife, Pat, started this Explorers Post.
Okay.
And according to his boss, Sheriff Ellis, quote, kids could really talk to him. He would be the middleman. They'd go to him before they'd come to me. He always had the kids' best interest at heart, end quote. So
nice.
It's a small community, and instead of going to the sheriff, they were going to Joe.
Yeah.
As far as the press was concerned, he was the first deputy that the local newspaper, the Marietta Times reporters, would call about a case for a story. And if he couldn't tell them what they wanted, he would always tell them why. He was also the guy who would bet Michigan and Michigan State fans when they played Ohio State. And when he'd lose, he would wear the Michigan or the Michigan State shirt for the day to pay off his debt when the Buckeyes lost a football or a basketball game.
Which hasn't been very good in the last few years.
I was like, he's a guy's guy.
Yep.
He's a fun guy. And he's just an honest, salt of the earth, good man.
Yep.
In 1981, he's been working for the Washington County Sheriff's Department, and he was already making plans for when he retired. He wanted to teach law enforcement. So just to recap, great guy, trustworthy, fair officer of the law. He's a wonderful husband and a father. Now, another officer working at the Washington County Sheriff's Office is Mitchell Robert Ruble. Mitch was born on December 4th, 1950. That's my dad's birthday. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, to parents John and Marion Schreiber Ruble. When he's a little boy, his parents are both killed in a car accident, and he is actually adopted and raised by Richard and Lorraine Snyder.
Okay.
He graduated Lowell High School in Lowell, Michigan in 1969, and then moved to the Ohio Valley to be closer to his family. He served in Vietnam with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in the Air Force, earning himself a Bronze Star. I don't know what you have to do to get a Bronze Star. Isn't that terrible that I don't know? And my dad was even in the Air Force.
Yeah,
What's wrong with me?
Don't know that one either.
He was a part of the Army National Reserve, where he was a Senior Master Sergeant of Security Forces. In 1977, he marries Sandra Simmons, and these two would go on to have 3 children. In 1979, Mitch is working for the Washington County Sheriff's Department alongside Joe. He's an expert firearms instructor. He's a collector and enthusiast of guns. He loves history, hunting, fishing. I thought this was funny. One of the things in the list was reloading. So he's like that guy who can reload the magazine and do all that really fast.
Yeah, and artillery guns.
Military surplus stores and military history, especially World War II.
Oh, nice.
And speaking of being a firearms enthusiast, Mitch was campaigning the sheriff's department as a munitions expert, that he wanted them to issue number 4 buck for their officially issued shotguns.
Okay.
That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
We're early, but we're here.
By the way, a Bronze Star, I just looked it up, is it's an award for something done heroic in battle. Basically, that's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mitch's family had law enforcement officers and military men going way back, but Mitch liked to bend the rules a little bit as a law enforcement officer. He liked to get results. And now it wasn't all that exciting in the Washington County, Ohio Sheriff's Department. Mm-hmm. There had been 9 homicides in 28 years.
And he was hoping for more? What?
I'm just saying they were sitting around a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a small town, and there wasn't a whole lot going on, which is good, right?
Kind of like the town that I grew up in.
Yeah. And deputies Mitch Ruble and Bob Smithberger, who was also in the Army Reserve with his buddy Mitch, they're good friends and they're also work colleagues. So Bob Smithberger also works for the County Sheriff's Department. Right. A lot of guys working for the County Sheriff's Department when absolutely nothing's going on. So everybody must have been getting pulled over for taillights and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Then in 1979, Mitch and another officer named John Dake are out on patrol together, and they pick up 18-year-old Gary Beagle in New Matamoros as a suspect in a breaking and entering case. So they're picking up this 18-year-old kid, Gary.
Right.
They think he's been breaking and entering.
All right.
They cuff him. They put him in the back of the cruiser. And Mitch kept asking Gary a question about another guy involved in this breaking and entering, and Gary keeps telling him, I don't know, over and over. He keeps saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And that's when Mitch instructed Deputy John Dake, who's driving the car, to pull over near Leith Run Park. Quote, Ruble got out and got in the rear passenger seat. I was still handcuffed. He grabbed my hair, pulled it back, put his fist in my face and told me, quote, I'll get you. Then he hit me twice, end quote.
Wow.
Then Mitch made him get out of the car and walk toward the Ohio River. Quote, the water was right to my feet, and he told me I could shoot you, and he stuck a gun between my eyes, end quote.
Gee whiz.
So Mitch is beating up his suspect.
Yeah. And
then according to Gary Beagle, he put a gun into his head and told him, I'm going to kill you if you don't confess to this breaking and entering. This is an 18-year-old kid, by the way.
Man.
I'm not saying he was a good 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, but still.
But he was an 18-year-old kid.
Right.
And Gary, he files a complaint against Mitch for abuse.
Of course.
And Lieutenant Joe Clark was leading the internal investigation into Mitch Ruble, and whether or not he was in the wrong for beating a suspect and threatening him. And shortly afterward, Mitch Ruble was suspended. Then Joe made the recommendation for Mitch to be fired, and he tells this to his boss, Sheriff Ellis. But Sheriff Ellis then goes out of town in December of 1979, leaving the job of firing Mitch to his next in charge, the guy who said he should be fired, Joe Clark.
Right.
So Joe asked fellow deputy Bob Sears to summon Mitch to Joe's office, and according to Bob Sears, quote, "After a while I could hear the door open and slam quite loudly, and Ruble came walking past and said, 'Let me out of here. That son of a bitch fired me,'" end quote.
Wow.
Yep. That is December of 1979.
Okay.
So he hands in his badge and his weapon.
Hand in your badge and your weapon. Hand in your badge and your weapon. Hand in your badge and your... It's, the Italian job.
The Italian job.
Yeah.
But when I read that, he handed in his badge and his weapon. He's not happy about it at all. Not to mention, it's hard to find work in law enforcement when you've been fired for excessive force.
Yeah, exactly.
So he found work as a corrections officer, where I guess they don't care if you use excessive force, at the Noble Correctional Institute. And he worked there for 25 years.
Okay.
Now, after Mitch is fired, from many of the sources I read, Mitch kind of spiraled. He would get drunk. He would tell anybody who would listen in this little town of Marietta, Ohio, that Joe Clark was an idiot, a worthless excuse for a law enforcement officer, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I do think that Joe knew what Mitch was saying about him, but what are you going to do? And again, he's the kind of guy who's going to turn the other cheek.
Sure.
He was just doing his job.
Right.
And I mean, this was a guy who rode with his window down so he could hear in case somebody was calling for help. Of course, he's going to do the right thing and fire somebody.
Sure.
Now, somewhere in here, and I have no idea if it had anything to do with the beating of Gary Beagle or not, but Mitch's buddy and fellow Army reservist Bob Smithberger has also left the Washington County Sheriff's Department. Now, remember I said that Joe Clark was really involved in the war on drugs in their county.
Right.
He was big into education in the schools, but he was also tough on the dealers. And in February of 1981, Joe did an interview with a local newspaper saying that something big was on the horizon in their war on drugs. And he was actually quoted that something was going down and they would be naming names the following week and arresting folks. He gives this interview on Friday, February 5th, and the story hits the papers on Saturday, the 7th.
Okay.
On February 7th, 1981, Joe went home that afternoon stopping to buy a gun and ammo magazine. I thought that was kind of funny. Then he went home to spend time with his wife and teenage son. Ohio State was playing Michigan State that night in basketball. It was televised, and Joe wasn't gonna miss it.
Of course not.
Nope, not gonna miss it. And that night, he and his wife, Pat, are in the living room watching the game. Joe's drinking a beer, and Pat is eating cheese and crackers. Pat's a woman after my own heart, except my crackers are gluten-free.
There you go.
He's got his new magazine with him. He's perusing that as the game is happening, or maybe during commercials. And I already said he's drinking a beer.
Right.
But he gets up and walks into the kitchen for more cheese and crackers, or possibly another beer, when Pat, his wife, hears a loud explosion. She hears this thud. She rushes into this dark room because the light in the kitchen's been blown, and Joe is in the floor, and he's bleeding from his head. Now, Pat's first thought is that Joe has had a heart attack. Like the light blew, he had a heart attack, he'd had some sort of heart issues in the past.
Right.
But it's dark in the kitchen, and she thinks he's hit his head on the kitchen counter. That's why his head is bleeding. So as he fell, he knocked himself in the head.
Right.
She calls for an ambulance, and they get him to the hospital. Pat's there with their son, and they're waiting in the emergency room to hear from the doctor. And when the call goes out through dispatch, one of Joe's younger deputies follows this ambulance to the hospital. His name was Jack Taylor. Now, when the doctor comes out to speak with Joe's wife, Pat, he doesn't have good news. Joe Clark is dead, But he also tells Pat and her children, as well as Deputy Jack Taylor, that Joe didn't die of a heart attack. He had been shot. Now, the family's beyond confused. Pat was certain he'd fallen and hit his head, and now she's realizing that her husband, a law enforcement officer, was shot in their home. And he wasn't just shot, he was ambushed.
Wow.
This is the work of a sniper. Joe's buddies are shocked and angry and worried. They rush to the house in the 400 block of Dodds Run Road in Marietta, Ohio. They secure the crime scene. All they know is that Joe's been shot dead and that Pat thought the light bulb had blown and Joe had had a heart attack. And when they arrive, they can see that the window into the kitchen had been blown out and there is shotgun pellets in the ceiling. That's what happened to the light that Pat thought had blown. It was shot out.
Wow.
The killer shot through the window, which meant he had to stalk and wait for this perfect shot. He had to wait for Joe to walk into the kitchen. Now, outside, they find one military boot print in the snow and one spent shotgun shell, a spent 4-buck shotgun shell. Joe was shot in the head, the neck, and the shoulder. The officers start canvassing the area. They're talking to anyone and everyone who might have seen something. This is a small community.
Sure.
And they actually find 10 witnesses who had seen a blue Ford Pinto near Joe and Pat's home that night.
Yeah, you can never trust anyone that drives a Pinto.
Well, there were some problems with the Pinto, right?
Actually,
Kaboom.
The first car I ever bought back in 1977 or 78
You
was
drove a Pinto?
a Pinto wagon.
Oh, my goodness.
It's all I could afford.
I think my high school boyfriend drove one of them drove a Pinto wagon. I think it was red with like the wood paneling down the side.
Yeah, mine was chocolate poop brown. That tells you how poor I was.
Well, you know what? You had wheels. That was all that was important back then, was that you had wheels.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
But all of them said the same thing, that there was a guy sitting behind the driver's seat of this blue Ford Pinto, and the car was on. It was idling. They also said that whenever anyone drove past to kind of take a peek inside, the driver would put up his hand and he would kind of put his head down and he was shielding his face. But one witness said that they drove past the blue Pinto and then heard a shotgun blast. And because of that witness and the fact that the killer, no matter what kind of $6 million man he was, Steve Austin, I'm really throwing it back because it's 1981. He couldn't have made that shot and then run back to the Pinto to drive away. So now they know this is a two-man job. There are two people involved.
Okay.
Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's headquarters, Sheriff Ellis gives the homicide case of their fallen brother to 26-year-old Jack Taylor. He's brand spanking new. And I'd be lying if that decision didn't raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah.
Even Jack's. He was green.
Yeah.
This was his very first homicide case. And it's the most important case and the most highest profile case they've had in the history of the Washington County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah.
And they give it to this brand new deputy, 26 years old.
Suspicious.
Is it, though? Because part of me thought they didn't want to give it to one of his friends. That the sheriff didn't want to give it to somebody who was so close to him that they had blinders on.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's going to happen anyway.
Okay.
Jack thinks that Joe's murder has to be drug-related, right? He's big into the war on drugs. He'd just given that interview that hit the newsstands.
Right.
Yeah, it had just hit the newsstands that morning, and they were about to take down some people, and he was about to name names. And 3 days after Joe's murder, dispatch calls Deputy Jack Taylor to say somebody's been shot at a local trailer park. And when he gets there, he's the first guy to arrive. He goes inside this trailer and he finds blood everywhere, a dead victim on the floor, and all around him is cocaine and PCP, angel dust. He was a small-time drug dealer. And because Joe had said what he did, that he was busting up this drug trade wide open, right? Jack Taylor thinks that this has something to do with Joe's murder.
Right.
Maybe this dead man was an informant for Joe.
Mm.
They start bringing in every known drug dealer in the area and questioning them. And this second victim was also shot in the head, just like Joe Clark.
Okay.
Meanwhile, it was time for Joe Clark's funeral. Over 500 people came to pay their respects. Deputy Jack Taylor was actually one of his pallbearers. And the police were also very aware that they were all in the same place at the same time. So if there's a sniper out there, they're thinking, maybe he's going to take somebody else. Who's he going to take out next, right?
Right.
And they're just serving themselves up on a silver platter. But there were a bunch of plainclothes officers all around the funeral and the graveside services just to be on the safe side. Remember, they'd had like 9 homicides in 28 years. Yeah. Now, as soon as the funeral is over, Jack is back to work. He checks out the whole blue Pinto angle. And what he discovers is that there are like over 4,000 blue Pintos registered at the DMVs surrounding their area.
Yeah, this is what, 1980?
1981.
81, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So he sets that aside unless he's going to sift through 4,000 of them.
Okay.
So Jack, brand new guy, green, he separates his leads into 2 categories, drugs and non-drugs. And in the non-drug pile is a former deputy who liked to speak disparagingly about Joe Clark, Mitch Ruble.
Yeah.
Now, they bring him in, and he has an alibi, as does his former partner and buddy, Bob Smithburger. Quote, I drank on the way back from Grantsville. I was at Bob Smithburger's the rest of the evening. We drank about 3 more beers together. The next day, we got up about 4 to 4:30 a.m. on Sunday. End quote.
Now, let me interrupt just for a second because I'm just trying to keep the player straight here. So Smithburger, was he a friend of Joe's?
He was, and he was a former deputy.
Right.
And remember, I said, I don't know why he left.
Right.
I don't know why he left.
I just wanted to make sure I was clear. Okay.
But he's also ex-military, just like Mitch.
Gotcha.
And they had been in Grantsville mustering or whatever it's called when you're there for reserves.
Right.
Yeah. They were reserving together.
Right.
So Mitch says that he and Bob were together all night. And they lived really close together in Lowell, Michigan, just outside of Washington County, which is interesting because he lived so close and he didn't want to go home to his wife and his new baby.
Yeah.
Mitch didn't go home.
Right.
But he did still have friends in the sheriff's department. And I'm not saying that former deputies Larry Stevens or Jack Taylor, who both questioned Mitch, were going easy on him. But he did have an alibi that was backed up by another former deputy. Mm-hmm. And just because he was bad-mouthing Joe to everybody, I mean, after he's fired, that didn't make him a killer.
Right.
You know, he's running his mouth, but that doesn't make him a killer.
He was just a disgruntled former employee.
Right. Yeah. And he was fired in 1979. It's now 1981.
Right.
But while Jack Taylor is conducting this investigation, he starts getting death threats. It's his very first homicide case. He's had to send his family away for their own safety. And he starts sleeping inside a jail cell with a shotgun in the corner and a pistol in the bed with him.
Wow.
Those are the words out of his mouth.
Man.
Then one of the informants that was working with the authorities, but was also a drug dealer, comes to the sheriff's department and says, I know who killed the drug dealer who was shot in the face. He gives them 2 names, Washington and Jones. And Jack Taylor is thinking 2 people, a shooter and a driver. Mm-hmm. And these 2 were from Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland area. So he calls the Cuyahoga Sheriff's Department, and they say, oh, yeah, we know them. And in fact, we got them in custody at the moment. They're sitting in jail. And Jack is like, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
And he asks them about the shooting at the trailer park of the small-time drug dealer. And these 2 guys tell him it was just supposed to be a robbery, but it turned into a shooting. It turned into a murder. And they also tell him that the person who orchestrated it all was Gary Beagle. Do you remember Gary? He's the one who got beat up.
Yeah.
So Gary was a drug trafficker in the northern part of Washington County, and Joe Clark had been investigating Gary, and Gary still held a grudge against the sheriff's department after he'd been beaten and threatened when he was picked up in December of 1979 by Mitch.
Right.
They interview him, but he has no knowledge about Joe. He doesn't know anything about the dead drug dealer in the trailer. They keep asking him, I don't know. I don't know.
That's his phrase.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And when they ask him about Washington and Jones, he tells them, never heard of them. And they have nothing to connect Gary Beagle to Joe Clark's murder. So they have to let him go. Then Jack Taylor got a phone call about a local man who was known as a big drinker. He was at one of the watering holes saying that he had shot that, quote, mother head off, end quote.
Wow.
And this dude owned a blue Ford Pinto.
There you go.
But he was tanked all the time, and there was nothing to link him to the murder other than the fact that he was one of the 4,000 people driving a Pinto.
And that he said he shot,
Yeah. But he was drunk every time he said it, apparently. But he's just one of those people who's driving, a bomb on the road, the Pinto.
Yeah.
Those were so dangerous. I mean, wasn't it because the gas tank was in the back?
Yeah.
And if you got rear-ended, kaboom.
Yep. Yeah, they didn't have any protection around it, or the gas tanks weren't lined. I mean, it was just a steel tin can.
I'm telling you, Gen X, we were living on the edge.
Yeah, we had yard darts.
But now, under a lot of pressure to solve Joe Clark's murder, and poor Jack Taylor is just getting nowhere. His wife at the time is miserable, and she didn't want to live like that anymore. And Jack actually tenders his resignation. Not just over the case, but he leaves the sheriff's department. And I've seen an interview with him, and he says he's ashamed because he was kind of running away. It was his first homicide. He didn't solve it, and it has haunted him for the rest of his life.
Wow.
Then, according to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Washington County Sheriff Richard D. Ellis had 10 pencil sketches made of the man he thinks killed Joe Clark. These sketches were made by a police artist from Parkersburg, West Virginia, from descriptions by those who saw a long-haired blonde young man on Dodds Run Road on the night of February 7th, 1981.
In the Pinto?
In the Pinto.
Okay.
And a state highway patrol investigator even hypnotized 4 women and 2 men and 1 boy to get this description.
Okay.
They're trying everything they can.
Yeah, because they got nothing.
And Sheriff Ellis, who was such a good friend and adored his second in charge, Joe Clark, he vows he's never going to give up on this case. Now, at this point, Joe's family, they don't really know if they're ever going to find out who murdered their father and their husband. And his brothers at the sheriff's department are sick that they can't find the person who murdered one of their own. Then 31 years after Joe Clark's murder, a cold case unit is formed in Washington County. It's now 2010. And Sheriff Larry Minks put it together and handed it over to Detective Jeff Severs. You're the guy, Jeff. You're going to man the helm.
Okay, Jeff, it's up to you, pal.
And first on the list is to solve the cold case of their brother-in-arms, Joe Clark. Now, the file for Joe was over 18,000 pages long because over the years, they kept interviewing people. And anytime they would hear something, they would drag somebody in. And all of these witnesses and interviews, again, the case is 31 years old.
Sure.
People have died. They've moved away. A lot can happen in 31 years.
Well, and recollections are going to be skewed because of the time that's, Yep.
Right. And for the record, the United States has 250,000 unsolved homicides a year.
Really?
Each year.
Jeez.
And a small percentage of these are ever solved. So they're up against some pretty horrible odds to solve this case.
Yeah.
They need bigger guns on board to help them. And enter Ohio BCI Special Agent John Jenkins, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. He's assigned to this cold case unit. He's really big into technology, and he was hip to all the newer advancements. And what he wants to work with first is the shotgun shell. He's hoping to find some touch DNA from where the killer loaded the shotgun. So they get this spent shell that they've had all these years. They test it for DNA. They get nothing. So they decide we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to go back to the beginning. And they go to the scene of the crime. And even though Joe's house has been sold several times over, the kitchen is still the same, which really, I was like, the kitchen's the first thing everybody redoes. I mean, if you're gonna
sell the house,
if you're gonna sell the house, or you're gonna redecorate, or you're going to renovate, it's always a kitchen.
Sure,
it's the hub of the house,
and then the bathroom,
and then the bathroom, but
and then the bedroom, and then the hallway, and then the den.
He's giving a running list of us renovating our house. So there you go. But my point is, the kitchen hasn't changed. It's still the same.
Okay.
And the owners allow the Ohio BCI to come in, and with laser mapping, they make a 3D model of the crime scene.
Oh, cool.
And then using the model and the knowledge of where this boot print was found and the buckshot shell, they're able to actually put themselves in the head of the killer. They know exactly the trajectory of this buckshot. They know where he was standing, how he shot through the window. They know he was lying in wait. He was there just looking for his moment to shoot Joe through this kitchen window. And because of all this new technology, they're able to pinpoint where the shooter had stood, 31 feet from the kitchen window.
Okay.
And knowing the exact distance had been necessary because from there, experts shot off a range of different types of shotguns to try to replicate the same damage that had killed Joe.
Oh.
And they narrowed it to one specific weapon, a particular shotgun, one that was a standard issue for law enforcement and military personnel.
Oh, really?
And they felt that this evidence would be the pinnacle piece needed for a conviction. They want this shotgun.
Okay.
So it needs to be somebody who, A, wears military combat boots, B, likes 4-buck shotgun ammo, and someone who has military experience. And they have to have a grudge. And what they're painting is a picture of one man.
Right.
Mitch Ruble.
Sure.
But they need more. They need more evidence. They need the murder weapon. So they test all these different types of 12-gauge shotguns to see what type of barrel and 4-buck shotgun shells would create the type of spray the kill shot did. And a 4-buck has 27 pellets. I learned more about this than I ever want to know. But a 4-buck has 27 pellets with a shotgun with a longer barrel, and it created a tight pattern of buckshot, like 5 by 5 inches. But the window that was blown out in the kitchen was 11 inches by 18 inches. And they know that he was 31 feet out and behind this one tree. So they try to match it with an 18-inch long barrel, something commonly carried by law enforcement. And it was the exact right gun. I mean, it created the exact same pattern.
Wow.
And now they're like, we were right.
Yeah.
It was a police officer or a former police officer or a former military man who has killed Joe. And they know that the only person who really held a grudge against Joe was Mitch Ruble. But remember, he had this same alibi all these years, his best buddy, Bob Smithberger.
Right.
He was with Bob. But the cold case unit and Seavers and Agent Jenkins, they discover some interesting information on old Mitch. Mitch was having an affair on his wife back in 1981. She was a woman he'd met during his stints in the Army Reserve. They served in the same unit. Her name is Penny Howard. And in the old newspaper articles, they say she has a, quote, history, end quote, with Mitch. In the A&E show Cold Case Files, they say that she was his mistress on the side. He's married. And maybe she didn't know that he was married. That part's kind of unclear to me, but she is married.
Right.
And it's a pretty small town. But Penny had been a Marietta resident since high school. She had served in the Army overseas before returning home and joining a unit of the U.S. Army Reserves based in Grantsville, West Virginia. And she's in a relationship with Mitch when he's fired from the sheriff's office. And Mitch tells Penny that he hated Joe Clark and that, quote, he wasn't trustworthy, end quote. Penny said, quote, he told me the department would be better off if he was 6 feet under, meaning Joe. He said if he blew his head off, it would only make him a martyr, end quote.
Wow.
She also said that, quote, he said he'd like to prove that Joe was crooked so he could leave the office the same way Mitch did, in shame, end quote.
Wow.
Now, on the night Joe is murdered, Penny and Mitch were supposed to have some alone time that day. And according to Penny's testimony, Mitch agreed to drive her home in her own car to Marietta from Grantsville because they had been there Army reserving. Mm-hmm. They were practicing with their unit.
Yeah.
And because he did this because Penny didn't feel well. He drove her car. Quote, we left at 4:30 p.m. and we arrived back a few minutes before 6 p.m. We had a discussion of the events of the day and the timeline. I kept telling him we got home at 6, but Mitch kept trying to tell me to change the time we got back in Marietta, end quote.
Oh.
She's also going to testify that Mitch drank a half a bottle of wine during their drive home.
Good Lord.
And according to the young sheriff's deputy, Jack Taylor, they went to a hotel when Joe Clark's name came up. And Penny is a Joe Clark fan. And according to her, he gave his heart to everything he would do, and he taught her a lot. But apparently Joe had given a talk somewhere, and Penny was raving about how wonderful it was. And it was more than Mitch could take. Not only had he been fired, just 18 months before that and had to leave his post in shame, now his mistress, the one person he goes to get away from his real life, is waxing poetic about the man he despises.
Sure.
Penny left and went home to her own husband, something she will later say she regretted. But she also watched Mitch drive away in a blue Ford Pinto.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's saying goodbye to him in his blue Ford Pinto.
Yep. And he's asking her to change her timeline.
Yes.
Okay, whatever.
Mitch drives to Bob Smithburger's apartment. He shows up still in his military fatigues and boots, uninvited and drunk, and asked him if he had shotguns at his place. And he did. He had one that Mitch had given him at an earlier time. And Mitch wants it back. And they get into this blue Ford Pinto, which is registered to Mitch's wife, Sandy. They get into the Pinto, and Mitch says to him, quote, let's go kill us a certain lieutenant, end quote.
Wow.
Bob said that Mitch was drunk and told him to drive to Dodds Run Road, where Mitch got out of the car near Joe and Pat Clark's home, carrying with him this shotgun. He tells Bob to wait 15 minutes for him. And Bob sat there trying to hide his face as all these people are driving by. He waited and waited for Mitch, and finally he drove away and went back home. Meanwhile, Mitch has posted himself up 30 feet away from the kitchen window of Joe and Pat Clark's home, and he's waiting for the perfect opportunity. And when Joe left his chair in the living room while watching basketball to go into the kitchen and get some more snacks, Mitch shot through the window, hitting Joe in the head, shoulder, and neck. Now later, Mitch calls Bob Smithburger to come pick him up along Gilman Avenue. He left him there.
Right.
But when he got into the Pinto, Mitch told Bob that he had shot Joe Clark. When they got to Bob's apartment, Mitch backed him against the wall with a large hunting knife and threatened to kill him if he ever told anyone. And he reminded Bob that he was now an accessory to murder and would go to prison right alongside him. And then the case went cold, right?
Sure.
But not anymore. Not now that their case unit is on it. They have so much that points to Mitch, but they don't have a witness. So they go after Bob Smithburger. They go after his alibi.
Right.
They interview Bob 3 different times. And because he kept talking to Lieutenant Seaver and Agent Jack Taylor of the Ohio BCI, they think he wants to talk. I mean, they bring him in 3 different times.
Sure.
And he just keeps talking and talking. He's not cutting them off. I don't know anything. Don't bother me anymore. And they're like, this guy's got a guilty conscience. He wants to unload.
Mm-hmm.
So they offer him immunity.
Oh, wow.
They tell him, as long as you didn't pull the trigger. And he's like, no, no, no. And they say, tell us everything you know, and we will give you immunity. And he sang like a canary, telling them everything. Mitch was drunk. He said he was going to shoot a lieutenant. He sat in the blue Pinto, eventually leaving Mitch on his own. Then he picked him up, and Mitch had been threatening him for the past 30-plus years never to open his mouth about what happened that night.
Right.
So they know it was Mitch, although they had suspected it for a long time, but they want the murder weapon. And what are the chances that that is available after all these years later, right?
Yeah.
And Joe Clark had died in 1981.
Right.
But Bob Smithberger, one of Mitch's old military buddies, owned that exact shotgun. So authorities hear that Mitch's Air Force buddies were having a little get-together at a military museum near Columbus, Ohio. I think they were at the Mott's Military Museum in Grovesport.
Okay.
And police are thinking there's an outside chance that one of these guys may have purchased this exact shotgun from Mitch. So they put surveillance on that location where these guys are meeting up. Bob tells them, we're meeting up with everybody, and we're going to be at this place near this museum near Columbus, Ohio. And the Bureau of Investigations in Ohio, they follow each of these men. And then they use facial recognition to determine exactly who these fellas are.
Wow.
And after they know that, they have their addresses, and they go out and speak with each and every one of them, one by one.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them deny that they'd ever purchased a shotgun from Mitch. That is, until they get to the very last guy, Jerry Brannon.
Okay.
Jerry's wife bought it from Mitch as a birthday present for her husband.
Oops.
2 years after Joe Clark's murder in 1983.
Wow.
Mitch had hand-delivered it to them. Yeah.
How would you like to know that the gun you own is a murder weapon?
I know.
Oh, my gosh.
And they're like, hey, can we have it? Jerry, can we have it? And he was like, he handed it over. Apparently, he had 2 different barrels that would work with it. And now police are like, we've got a confession from the driver, from his partner in crime, and now we have the murder weapon. So they're ready to bring Mitch in for a chat. And it just so happened that Mitch had been a victim of credit card fraud, and he's filed a report with the police. And on September 16th, 2014, they call him and say, hey, we got some information for you. Why don't you and the wife come on down to the station? Mm-hmm. And Mitch leaves his home, and the authorities follow him by helicopter all the way to the station. They followed him on the ground in unmarked cars all the way to the station. Wow. And at the same time, they are executing a search warrant inside Mitch Ruble's home.
Really?
Oh, very coordinated. They're like, we're getting this guy.
Wow.
When he makes it to the station, they immediately put 64-year-old Mitch Ruble in cuffs and say, quote, you're under arrest for the murder of Joe Clark, end quote. And according to the arresting officers, Mitch froze.
I guess so. He's like, I thought I got away with this.
I mean, they've questioned him tons over the years, right? But they never put him in cuffs.
Right.
Now, another lieutenant, Lieutenant Shook, tells him at that very moment, hey, dude, we're searching your house. And he asks him, are we going to find anything that could kill a police officer at your house? And he said, quote, I sure hope not, end quote.
Oh, not a great answer.
They actually found dozens of illegal handmade explosives, explosive powders, a modified AR-15 fully automatic rifle, and several hand grenades.
Jeez.
And on top of this felony murder charge he's about to get, this added 7 more felony counts to his murder charge.
Yeah.
According to the authorities and Agent Jack Taylor, it was so volatile, all of the stuff he had, they had to call in the Columbus Bomb Squad.
Jeez.
They had to destroy all of these explosives he had. They needed to countercharge them. And a local farmer actually gave the police some land and permission to do this on his land.
Man.
And they dug a great big hole in the ground. They put all this ammo inside. They covered up and kaboom.
Man.
And according to Agent John Jenkins of CTI, you could feel the ground shake when the explosion went off.
Yeah, I'm sure just the hand grenades alone.
I mean, they were actually thinking he could have like holed himself up in his house. I don't know if he was waiting for the zombie apocalypse or if he actually thought they were going to be coming for him.
Right.
But he had to feel, I don't know. I think he was pretty confident that he was going to get away with it.
Yeah, but in 30 years, he would have had to have been looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, the whole time.
Yeah.
Washington County Special Deputy Bruce Shook with Agent John Jenkins. They interrogated Mitch for 3 hours. And he said, quote, "I have nothing to say because I was not involved," end quote.
Yeah.
He tells him, "I've had this conversation before with you guys for years." Quote, "I had this conversation. I said you're barking up the wrong tree. I had nothing to do with this and no knowledge of it. And the evidence is circumstantial at best. And the statement I gave Larry Stevens was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth," end quote. Now, Detective Shook tells Mitch that investigators had evidence in the form of a military-style boot print found on the grounds outside of Joe Clark's home on Dodds Run Road, and that there were several witnesses who said they saw him riding in a blue Ford Pinto on that very same road on the night of the murder. Then they tell him, oh, by the way, Bob Smithburger has confessed that he drove you that night, where you got out of the car armed with a shotgun near Joe Clark's home. To which Mitch says, quote, "I understand you have evidence and we'll have to work through that during a trial. And I have to look at the possibility that there was some mistaken identity," end quote. But Lieutenant Shook reiterated, okay, we got all these witnesses who saw you in the Pinto, including your partner in crime, Bob Smithburger. Dude, you can say it's mistaken identity, but the guy who drove you there is saying it's you.
Jeez.
Yeah. How can you say you were mistaken
right
when you were, quote, he was sitting in the car right beside you, end quote.
Right. Wow.
And then Agent Jenkins asks Mitch, what do you think should happen to the person who killed Joe Clark? And he said, quote, "That's up to the judge," end quote. "Murder is murder. It's serious and there's no getting around it. But you have your job to do and we're just getting to have to go through this. This is a mess at best," end quote. Yeah, Mitch, I'd say so.
Yeah, understatement, Mitch.
They take him to the county jail and the judge sets bail at, you want to take a guess?
$1 million.
$2.5 million.
Wow.
Mitch pleads not guilty. He stayed there in the county jail until his first trial, which began in early 2015. Bob Smithburger testified against Mitch, but there were plenty of experts to refute that the gun they obtained from Mitch's friend Jerry wasn't the murder weapon. And the defense also argued that whoever drove this blue Pinto or had the sighting of the blue Pinto was saying that, they didn't know if it was him or not. Then the police didn't take tire impressions that day to compare the Pinto in question. So they could never say for sure that Pinto was the one that belonged to Mitch's wife, Sandy.
Beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the trial begins May 11th, 2015. And on October 20th, 2015, a jury was unable to render a verdict and was declared deadlocked. It's a mistrial.
Wow.
Because all of the jurors in the first trial felt that Mitch Ruble was guilty of a crime to some degree, but they were uncertain that he had pulled the trigger. And listen, Mitch had this stoic front and maintained his innocence the whole time, but he has no remorse, to which his attorney, James Burton, said he's not going to show remorse for a crime he didn't commit. But he did do some pretty shifty things while he was in jail and awaiting trial. He told his daughter to siphon funds out of an account and hide money. In another phone call from jail, he told his daughter when speaking about Bob Smithburger, quote, somebody's going to have to get him and convince him that he's either going to be a part of the problem or a part of the solution, end quote.
Gee whiz.
Which seemed to me like a little bit of a veiled threat.
A little bit? Jeez.
But after this hung jury, the state, they retry him again. The second murder trial began the last week of February 2016. This time, Mitch is wearing an orange jumpsuit. He's been in jail this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And then on March 11th, 2016, he was finally found guilty of felony murder in Washington County Common Pleas Court and sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole after 15 years.
And how old is he at this point?
He's in his 60s. I'm going to tell you. I've got it in my notes here.
Okay.
On April 28th, 2016, he is sentenced. He also received 11 months for a single fifth-degree felony count of unlawful possession of a dangerous ordinance.
Yeah. Good Lord.
He was ready for the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
That sentence was to be served concurrently with his life sentence. So Mitch is sent to Iowa. They send him to an out-of-state correctional facility because he'd been a cop and he'd been a correctional officer in Ohio.
Yeah.
So they were worried they were going to kill him.
Yeah.
And they're assuming that Mitch is going to appeal this decision. But before he had a chance to make an appeal, he was found dead in his bed on August 9th, 2017. He died in his sleep of natural causes. Here's what you want to know. He was 66.
Wow.
Now, today, Bob Smithburger apparently keeps a low profile.
Yeah, I would too.
And in accordance with their agreement, Bob Smithburger was never charged with any crime. Now, a couple of things. When Mitch was found guilty, the judge said, there are no winners here. Everyone is lost. Joe's family was just happy to put the whole thing to bed. They needed closure. Although Joe's wife, Pat, never got closure. She lost the love of her life, and her children lost their father. This case is believed to be one of the oldest cold cases involving the murder of a law enforcement officer that has ever been successfully solved and prosecuted. According to Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine, who prosecuted the case, quote, many people, including the defendant himself, likely thought that this case would never be solved. But today there is justice. Cold cases can be very difficult to solve, but as this case shows, it's not impossible when you have law enforcement and prosecutors who refuse to give up and are committed to finding the truth, end quote. By the way, on the night Joe was murdered, his beloved Buckeyes, Ohio State beat Michigan State.
There you go.
73-61.
Good.
So all these cold case files out there, there's like a less than 1% chance that a lot of these cases are ever going to be solved. But they weren't giving up on Joe Clark.
Right.
That's a story of Joe and Mitch. And that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kaiwolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
All right, well, here's my take on it. I mean, I'm glad that they were like bloodhounds and kept going after it until they found it.
Just kept going after it.
The one person that I have any sort of feeling for is Bob.
Yeah.
Now, he knew what this guy was going to do when he drove him there.
No, he didn't really.
Really?
He didn't think it was. He thought he was drunk. He's bluffing.
Yeah, but when you're taking somebody with a shotgun,
that's true.
Think you're going to kill him.
That's true.
But then there's the other side of that. That's like this guy's in fear for his life and his family because he's been threatened
over and over again, apparently, throughout the years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And he was Joe's friend.
He was Joe's friend and his friend in the reserves, and all of those buddies were together. And of course, nobody knew except for Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad they found out who did it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Joe needed justice and he got it.
He did. Well, let's talk about other people that got justice, but just for being stupid with a little bless your heart. All right, this first one I'm calling Go Big or Go Home or Go Back to Jail.
Okay.
In a plot straight out of an action movie, a 23-year-old man fresh out of prison decided the best way to get home was by hijacking, here we go, a semi-truck loaded with 10 shiny Corvettes.
Why do these people who just get out of jail do something so stupid to get right back in jail? By the way, is he in Kentucky? Because the Corvette factory is here in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
It didn't say.
Oh, okay.
But here's the thing. It made it even more of a felony because they were worth over $1.25 million.
Yeah.
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 Oh, I'm sorry. I did know that. According to the Arizona authorities.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
The man befriended the driver at a truck stop near Tucson, gained his trust, then forcibly ejected him from the cab before speeding off with the luxury haul.
Did he slow down that's a long drop from the cab to the ground if you're driving an 18-wheeler.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he stopped and kicked him out.
That's still a long
yeah, it is.
drop.
It is. When deputies caught up, the man ignored lights and sirens, driving so recklessly that the other vehicles had to pull over. Eventually, he was stopped and was arrested on multiple felony charges, including robbery and theft of 11 vehicles.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Thankfully, the Corvettes were unharmed and safely returned to their rightful owner to finish the journey.
Of course, everyone's like, I waited months for my Corvette.
It's it. Oh,
and it's on its way, and this asshat has to hijack everything.
All right, number 2.
I meant to do that.
Is it Kermit the Frog that meant to do?
It was supposed to be Pee-wee. Sorry. All right. A hapless holdup of a news agent in Abington, Oxfordshire, this is over in England, was captured on CCTV in 2012. During his attempted heist, James Allen removed his ski mask, fell over a drinks display, and then could not open the door to escape because he was pushing instead of pulling.
Oh, now I got to say, bless his heart. Bless his heart.
The lady he had just held up with a toy gun had to come and open it for him.
Oh, my gosh.
Not only that, but he had also tried to rob the same shop 10 days earlier. Allen, then 29 and of no fixed address, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for offense shown in the video and 2 years for possession of a firearm or imitation firearm to run concurrently.
Good Lord.
I know, it's so sad.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, he'd been in the day before. We know you.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing?
And it's almost like that Gary Larson, it's like the school for the gifted and the kids pushing
yeah, exactly.
the pull. Yeah.
All right, number 3 and finally, and this is from one of our in-laws and outlaws, Melinda Ransom.
Oh, thanks, Melinda.
Yep. And I'm calling this, and you thought the price of eggs were bad.
They are.
Yeah. An investigation into a suspicious bacon swap has led to felony charges being filed against a Marshall County man, deputies said.
Okay.
Cody J., and I hope I pronounce this right, Lucy, L-U-C-E-Y, Luque, or I don't know, of Glen Easton has been charged with obtaining money, property, and services by false pretenses and petite larceny. I never heard of that before.
Petite larceny. Just a little bit of larceny.
Just a tiny bit.
little bit of larceny.
I only did a little bit. According to social media posts from the Marshall County Sheriff's Office, the post said an investigation was launched after a Cameron High School student's grand champion bacon had been sold by another student at the West Virginia FFA, Future Farmers of America, State Ham, Bacon, and Egg Show at Ripley's Cedar Lakes Conference Center.
This sounds like someplace I would love to be. Rob, how much do I love bacon?
She loves her bacon.
I love bacon.
I never really ate bacon until we got married. And now I eat bacon.
All the time.
Yeah. An agricultural teacher at Cameron found 2 pieces of bacon had been incorrectly tagged at Cameron's meat lab processing room.
There's a meat lab with bacon?
Yeah. Oh.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. A slab of the grand champion bacon was sold for more than $900
Wow.
in Marshall County, and the meat was returned to the high school for cutting, according to deputies. Deputies said a review of the surveillance footage showed that Lucy, the guy, tampering with the package of Grand Champion bacon, removing its tag and selecting a replacement from the lab.
What was he going to do with this bacon?
Here it comes. The swap bacon was sold at the Ripley auction for $2,100.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, he was caught and busted, and now he's paying for it. So there's your bless your hearts for this.
They
week.
really saved the bacon on that one.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, listen, all the stuff that they go through, all these places and the lab and all that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
For perfect bacon.
Yeah.
And I am the person who so appreciates the perfect piece of bacon that has been cooked so perfectly and crisply.
Yeah, Kris likes crispy bacon, and I like it a little bit soft.
Floppy. He
Yeah.
likes floppy bacon.
I like
Who eats floppy bacon?
Well, I mean, I am older. Just kidding. Joking. Sorry.
I can't go on. Well, if you have a bless your heart, or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing or likes floppy bacon,
Yeah.
all you got to do is go to hitchtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can suggest a case or also tell us about your brush with true crime.
Yes.
That is my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitch to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.